to cut so much of this. I'm Callie. Up until recently, I was working in tech as an engineering recruiter. I did that for close to a decade. You may also have heard recruiters referred to as headhunters. That's not wholly inaccurate. And since I'm not doing that anymore and I am instead focusing on creative pursuits, I'm going to be taking this opportunity to share the hard-won knowledge that I've picked up over my years in the industry. This first segment is going to be a series of videos where I comment on a talk I gave at the Lesbians Who Tech conference in June 2023 and expand upon it. And after that, I'll be doing more topical videos and Q&As, Ask Me Anything type videos. I have done the best I can to cut out some of the more egregious ums and uhs and other filler sounds, but it's not going to be perfect. Thanks for bearing with me anyway. I am sort of new at this, and I hope it's helpful. If it is, check back next Wednesday for the next video in the series. If you like what I sound like, or look like, or stand for, check back on Friday, where I talk about mental health and depression and the very upsetting horror movie that helped me with both of those things.
Stage is all yours.
So the first thing that it is important for you to understand is that I did not remember that this was the title of my talk. I applied to speak at this conference several months before I was accepted, and when I got the agenda, I was like, wow, that's embarrassing. So I came up with an alternative title that's a little more representative of what I was going to be talking about. So I guess the lesson there is it's okay if what you do isn't perfect. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate you being here. Welcome to my talk, Navigating the Job Search Jungle. I want to start just by dismantling the idea that job searching has to be an adversarial process. I know it's not the most fun thing in the world. It is not something that people particularly enjoy doing. With that being said, my title is not intended to imply that the job search has to be a jungle. In fact, it's only really intended to imply that naming things is hard. So, navigating the job search jungle, or navigating the job search without losing your mind or your soul. So here's what we're going to cover. A quick note on resources. I know most of you are technical individuals, which means you know how to use Google. So I do have a PDF that the moderators are going to share with you that just has some very basic resources on connecting with people in the industry, job boards that you can use, and places you can find particular data around leveling and compensation. That's not what I'm going to be talking about today. I am going to be talking about kind of the intangible aspects of job searching, largely stuff that I wish somebody had told me. I'm going to go pretty quickly so that I can leave a little bit of time for questions. All right, moving forward. All right, who am I and why am I here? My name is Callie Voss. I'm currently a senior technical recruiter at Duolingo. I'm also one of the co-founders of the Neurodiversity ERG at Square, where I was a technical recruiter for 2 years. I have an MBA. I have a senior human resources manager certification. I've been recruiting for about 10 years, and I have spent several millennia searching for jobs, or at least that's what it feels like. I like including slides like this because I always sort of expect when I'm giving a talk, the people watching it will be like, who is she and why is she here? Who the hell do you think you are? And I still think that. And with that, getting the job. So, interviewing. Not everybody's favorite thing. Here are a few tips. You've probably heard people say, do your homework. This is what that means. Utilize the resources at your disposal to come in knowing how many interviews you should be expecting, what's the structure of the interviews. For those of you that are in a technical role, a lot of that will be coding interviews, system design interviews. There were also things known as behavioral interviews, which is where you'll discuss hypothetical situations that you've encountered or potentially discuss challenges you've encountered in the past. Best to come in moderately prepared for things like that. And there are websites where you can practice coding interviews. There are also breakdowns on several sites of what to expect when you're interviewing with a particular company, Glassdoor being one resource. Other things that it's helpful to know, how is the company hierarchy structured? Is it mostly a flat organization? Is it broken out by function? Are there centers of excellence? This next one, you'll see that I've starred projects and priorities. That is something that is sometimes hard to come in knowing, but it will set you up for success in the interview process. Because if you know about the projects that your particular team is interviewing for, and if you know what the team and the organization's priorities are, you can both see if they align with your priorities, and you can frame your own skill set and experience in such a way that it lines up with those projects and priorities if you decide this is the job you want. So hopefully not a ton that I need to go into here, but just to expand on a couple of things that I talked about. As far as knowing what interviews to expect, how many stages you're going to be going through, who you'll be meeting at each stage, you can ask for that information up front. In your initial call with a recruiter, it's okay to say, hey, what's the structure of the interview process? What can I expect? How many rounds is this? It's equally okay to ask how many people they have at each stage. How fast do you need this process to move, or how fast do they need this process to move? Because if a company is only just starting to interview, it could be that they expect your interview process and the decision-making process of the role to take a few months, versus if they have a number of candidates in mid to late stages, they may need you to progress through the process pretty quickly if you're going to keep pace with those other candidates. So all of that is okay to ask. It's also okay to ask who you'll be meeting at each stage of the interview process, or who will be conducting each interview. And if they don't have a name for you, they should at least have what role the person is in. For example, like if it's a coding interview, they probably can't tell you which software engineer is going to do the coding interview, but they can say, oh, it'll be one of our backend software engineers, or it'll be one of the software engineers from a product team. And that should give you an idea of kind of what experience and what mindset the person who is going to be evaluating you will be coming in with. Similarly, it's also okay to say, oh, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting someone in that role to be involved in this interview process. For example, if somebody on, say, a business team was interviewing a software engineer, or vice versa, if an engineering manager were interviewing a marketing person. That's not unheard of, but it's uncommon enough that you could say, cool, what's their interview? What purpose does it serve? Or what is that interview structure going to be like? And the person that you're talking to, whether it is a recruiter or a hiring manager, should be able to tell you why this person or this department is participating in the interview process. So what role they're going to have in the hiring decision, and what relationship they're going to have with the person in your function. Company and team structure. So when I say a flat structure, what that means is it's not aggressively hierarchical. So there's not lots of layers in between senior leadership, the C-suite, et cetera, and regular employees. Oftentimes, a flat organization, teams are expected to be more autonomous in their decision making. Oftentimes, too, there is an expectation that employees at all levels have a slightly greater level of access to leadership. It's not, the C suite is up in an ivory tower and they're never going to learn your name kind of thing. A lot of companies that strive for a flat structure only maintain it for so long. As companies grow both in maturity and size, that becomes harder to maintain. So that is something to think about when you are looking at the kinds of jobs that you want to participate in. Is it really important that you be in an organization that has a lot of structure and a lot of hierarchy? Is that something that you feel would benefit your professional journey? Or would you prefer maybe a more compact organization with a flatter organizational structure where you'll have a little more visibility into what's going on with leadership and what's going on kind of with the overall journey of the company? Not that I'm saying every organization with a flat structure has that level of visibility and transparency, but it's usually at least a goal. So, projects and priorities. The reason that I advise learning about this as early as possible is twofold. The first reason is that it helps you understand if the way that you are conceptualizing the role is accurate to how it's actually going to be once you're in it. And to expand on that, it gives you a sense of what's important to the team you're going to be joining and the company you're going to be joining. Do those priorities line up with what you are wanting to work on, what you're wanting to learn, the direction you want to go in your career, et cetera, ad nauseum. The other reason, like I said, is it allows you to sort of tailor the way that you present yourself to those projects and those priorities. For example, let's say that the team that you're working on is looking for a full stack engineer and they don't have any front end leaning engineers on their team. You have mostly been working on back end projects, but outside of work, you have pursued some UX design courses, or you have a passion for web design, or something along those lines, or you're just really close with the designers in your current org, you work really well with them. I did not do a great job of explaining that last example. I did not mean to sound like I was conflating front-end engineering with design. They do have some overlapping skill sets. The point that I was trying to make is if you know more about what a team is working on, you can mention things that might not be obvious on your resume, but that could be an asset to them and make you a stronger candidate. That's something that you can work into your answers to questions to let this team know, I can do this thing that you need. And this might even be kind of like a fun surprise as far as your suitability as a candidate. Other things that are pretty critical to find out: what is the work culture like? And why is this role open? I.e., is the team growing, or is this a backfill? And if it's a backfill, how many backfills are there? What is turnover like? Because that can be a signal for you as a job seeker. So, work culture. How informal is it? How loosey-goosey is it? Is this a team where it's okay to kick back with a beer at 4:55? Is it the kind of organization where people work until 7 or 8? Is it a fully in-office culture? Is it a remote-friendly culture? Does it skew very young, and is there more of a festive atmosphere? Does it skew a little older, and things are a little more reserved? Not that, older people can't party. Certainly been the case that they can. But for yourself, what kind of an environment will you do best in? Questions to consider. Are you a caregiver? And if so, how flexible does this organization appear to be in terms of things like schedules? Can you start your work early and leave early? Can you take a break in the middle of the day to fulfill caregiver responsibilities and then come back? Or is this, a very strict 8:30 to 5:30 kind of culture? Also, just like, do people laugh? Do they make jokes with each other? Do people socialize outside of work? Do people seem like they want to socialize outside of work? To expand on that, if there is socializing outside of work, is it a comfortable environment for people who aren't in their 20s, for people who don't drink alcohol, for people who are, like I said, caregivers, or for people who might have health conditions? There are a lot of ways that company cultures can inadvertently be exclusionary. And generally, if that is the case, you can clock it pretty early on. Why is the role open? If the team is growing, that's usually a good sign. It means that the company is confident enough to invest in the future of the team. It also means that the company is probably doing okay money-wise. Probably. It's not a guarantee, but probably. Versus if it's a backfill, why did the person leave? Had they been there for 10 years and they were ready to retire? Did they take time off to be with their family? Did they get a job offer at a company in a different industry that they pursued because it was a passion of theirs? Or did they just leave because they didn't want to be there anymore? And if that's the case, how many people before them did the same thing? Generally, I would not advise asking that outright, but asking a little bit about what things on the team have been like for the last few months. What was this person working on? How was that working relationship? How were the projects managed? What were the cross-functional partnerships like? You can kind of feel out if there was any tension, or if it's just, it was time for this person to move along. Sometimes too, it'll be the case that the person switched teams because they wanted to cultivate a different skill set. And that is something that is pretty normal, especially in the tech space. And if you were to receive a job offer, you could even say, hey, I'd really like to talk to the person who was doing this job before me. Would that be okay? They're not obligated to talk to you, but generally, if things on the team are amicable and they're still at the company, that should be fine. Most of this information, the recruiter that you're working with should be able to provide or help provide. Sometimes the hiring manager that you meet will also be able to provide some of those answers. That isn't always the case, but when you aren't able to find the information on your own, you should expect to be able to use those individuals as resources. And that should be met with a positive response. Did you notice how many times I emphasized should? You will find, if you haven't already, that sometimes people react to any sort of question that they weren't prepared for as a pressure test or as an inherent lack of faith instead of, just a well-meaning interrogation of the process. And to that I say, you don't need to work with those people. You might decide that it's worth it if it's one person who is maybe kind of difficult to communicate with throughout the process, particularly if it's your recruiter. If you really like the hiring manager you meet, if you really like the team members that you meet, and your recruiter is only okay, that's not really that surprising. The bar is not always that high. And I think that's probably fine because that's kind of the case for a lot of roles. But
If you are in an interview situation where, let's say, you don't even have a recruiter, you're working directly with the hiring manager, and they're not able to answer these simple questions, what's the interview process like? How long is it expected to take? When are you wanting to fill this role? Why is the role open? If they can't answer those questions, that is a pretty bad sign, and worth interrogating further.
So, part 2 of your homework: know your worth and know your growth. And what I mean by that is do research ahead of time to know what your skill set and level of experience is worth on the market. Just get a ballpark, get a benchmark, so that you don't come in and have to rely on whatever anchor the company you're interviewing with sets.
So I did not actually get to say as much as I wanted to about this. There was one kind of piece of it that I forgot to mention. That's know your worth. It's what I talked about. Do your research ahead of time, come in with an idea of what your skill set is currently going for on the market. Know your growth is two things. It's what skill sets do you need to further develop in order to continue on the career trajectory that you want to be on? Weak points, things that could be better, anything that could fall under the umbrella of areas of growth. And then also, where do you want to grow outside of just kind of that standard skill set? Do you have an interest in being more involved in the product development process? Are you a full stack engineer that would like to get more exposure to DevOps and infrastructure? Do you want to get more involved in initiatives outside of your particular department? Do you want to get more involved in social impact? Do you want to get more involved in diversity and inclusion? Do you want to get more involved in mentoring junior team members? All of that can fall under areas of growth, and it's good to have an idea of what you want to focus on, because you will be asked about that, or at least you should be asked about it.
And to that end, no one meets every single criterion in a job post. I imagine many of you have heard data that male identifying persons will often apply for a job where they only meet about 60% of the criteria, where female and non-binary identifying persons will often wait till they meet 90 to 100% of the criteria. That's a real study. It was based on an internal report by Hewlett Packard. It's been cited in a lot of articles and books. And I actually do have a PDF of a Harvard Business Review article that looks at that data. It's a little out of date. It's from 2014, but it's a pretty interesting read if you're not familiar with it.
The application thing is tough. There are a lot of companies now that use tools such as Textio or TopRecruit to get a sense of if the language in their job posts is skewing toward any particular biases that might turn off particular population. But a lot of times, people who put these job descriptions together are very anxious about not including something that could be important later on. So they sort of throw the whole kitchen sink in. And that can be challenging if you are someone who feels very strongly that you want to meet all of the criteria in a job post before you apply. There can be a lot of fear in the process, a lot of fear of not measuring up, fear of being challenged on your qualifications, fear of even kind of stepping up to the table. And I'm here to tell you, I've been doing this a long time. Nobody meets every single piece of criteria in a job post. Literally never. Never. It doesn't happen. Unless the job post just says converts oxygen into carbon dioxide, and that's the whole job, nobody meets every single criteria. If there is one that you are particularly worried about, you can ask about it. Ask the recruiter or the hiring manager. For example, when I was working on a security role, we listed Terraform as one of the technologies that we wanted people to be familiar with. What we really meant was it would be great if you were familiar with infrastructure as code. And that's what I told people when they asked about it. There was a Terraform interview. It didn't require you to know Terraform ahead of time. So it's okay to ask about those kinds of things. And again, the way that you're answered, the way that the person that you ask speaks to you, should give you some signal into if this is a process that is a good use of your time.
And one last thing about know your worth and know your growth. The only people who benefit from you coming in with imposter syndrome and self-doubt and undervaluing your abilities are people with an active interest in exploiting you, as in not contributing to your growth, as in paying you less than you're worth, as in taking advantage of your feelings of inadequacy in order to get you to commit more to the business. Hopefully you don't encounter any of those people or organizations, but realistically they exist, and I want to be transparent about that. But if you come in armed with information, then you can hopefully kind of nip all of that in the bud.
Nothing makes me more feral than hearing from a candidate about an interviewer that deliberately made them upset or hurt their feelings or made them cry. Interviews are not supposed to make you feel stupid or inadequate. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
So, what are interviews for? Ideally, they're to help the organization find out who you are and what you can do and bring to the table. For you, you should look at it as kind of a road test of who am I going to be working with and what are they like. What you should expect from an interview process is that everyone you meet should want you to succeed. In an ideal state, they have a problem, they need someone with a particular skill set, and you are the solution to that problem, or they should want you to be. There is a phenomena in tech where some companies will try to present the idea that you are lucky to just be considered for the job, and you're lucky to be in the room, and it's your good fortune that you're being interviewed, and that's fake. It's not real. It's kind of gaslighty. You are the commodity, you are the prize, and you are bringing your unique personhood and skills to this organization, and they are the lucky ones, regardless of who they are. And that can be really hard to remember during the job search process. It can kind of beat you down a little bit, but that is, I would say, one of the most important things that I've learned over the course of my career is if an organization tries to make you feel like you're lucky just to be in the room or just to be considered, it's not really one you necessarily want to be working with.
Basically, I said what I needed to say there. But the one thing I will caution is the reason that I advise both knowing your worth and knowing your areas of growth is because you want to come into this process with eyes wide open so that you understand when you're being treated fairly. For example, if you go through the interview process and you really like everybody you meet, but you just don't meet the criteria that they're looking for. If you're treated with respect through that whole process and you get the transparency and the clarity and the communication that you need to walk away from it feeling good about the organization, that's a company you can come back to. That's a company you can interview with again. Versus if you come in ill prepared or you interview for a role that you're slightly underqualified for and they make you feel like garbage. The only garbage there is, well, I don't need to finish that sentence. It's not you. That's the takeaway. And You see a lot of people that like to make themselves feel big by making others feel small. Some people do it in their personal lives. Some people do it hiding behind the auspices of the company they work for. They need to feel superior. And I think those people are really lonely. And it's not my job or your job or anyone's job to fix them. But it's also not your job or your responsibility to put up with them. So try to be as classy as you can. Come in with eyes wide open. Be clear on who you are, what you want to do, what you need to do to get to where you want to be in your career. And then remember that you deserve to be treated with respect. That's all for today. Thank you so much for coming with me on this journey. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, check back next Wednesday for the next section of my talk, where we'll cover negotiation and the tricky question of, what if I don't have a dream job? What if I just need a job? If you like what I do and you are interested in supporting it, there are a few ways you can do that down below. If you'd like to submit a question for an upcoming Q&A video, an Ask Me Anything type video, there is a link to do that below as well. And I think by the laws of content creation, this is the part where I tell you to please like and subscribe. Thanks, everybody, and check back next Wednesday for more Work Life Wednesday, or check back on Friday for my as yet unnamed horror and mental health segment.